Good day everyone, my name is Jhem, a graduate of Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Valenzuela and is a licensed professional teacher who is currently teaching at Escuela de Sofia of Caloocan Incorporated. And in this video, as a participation for Bibal's Teach Together Challenge, I am going to discuss a specific lesson about genetics. Have you ever wondered why some people by any time have told you that you look exactly like one of your parents? Or sometimes they even mention a specific feature in you which they found alike your parents? Well, in this video, we are going to talk about how and why did that happen. Because in this video, we are going to discuss the concept behind the law of dominance, which is only one of the 3 laws of inheritance. But before we proceed to that, I would like you first to take note of the questions that flashed on screen and that try to answer it before or after we finish the discussion. Number 1. Why did the dog with black spots became an offspring of 2 white parent dogs? And number 2, if Andrew got the pointed nose from his father, does it mean the gene from his mother, who has a flat nose, was not passed down to him? This time, I want you to get a picture of your parents, or if they are around, go near them. Then try to list down features which you think you got from them. Try to separate the list of the features you think you got from your mother, then the features that you think you got from your father. Now, for you to be able to do that activity, I want you first to pause this video, then play it again. Afterwards, you have listed all the features that you think you got from your parents already. You might be wondering now what made it possible for you to have that type of a hair, that nose, that skin color, that eyes, that lips. But with your list, of course, we will now try to figure out how did you look the way you do right now. Let's now start the discussion. Just like what I've said, we are going to discuss the law of dominance, which is only one of the 3 laws of inheritance. But before we proceed to that, we have here our competency, which is to predict phenotypic expressions of traits following simple patterns of inheritance. So ang goal natin ngayon is malaman natin kung ano ba yung possible na maging expressed traits sa mga magiging offspring if the mother or the father or the parents are this and that. And before we proceed to that, of course, we will not be understanding the concept behind this without knowing important things that we will be using along the discussion of the law of dominance. So let me first introduce to you Gregor Mendel. As we all know, Gregor Mendel is the father of genetics. He started the scientific study of heredity, and he used the hybridization experiment with pea plants, or in scientific name, ito po is Pisum sativum, in the 1856. So, ang tagal na. So, therefore, the 3 laws of inheritance have been existing for a very long time already. Now, with that in mind, in this experiment, Gregor Mendel was able to propose the laws of inheritance, which I have said already. There are 3. First, we have the law of dominance, the law of segregation, and the law of independent assortment, by which in this day, we are going to focus only with the law of dominance. Now, talking about inheritance, this is just as simple as a process by which characters or genes are being passed from the parents to offspring. So, para siyang pagmamana. Parang, for example, yung parents mo ay may mga ari-arian ipapamana sa'yo. It's the same way here. The traits that your parents have will be passed to you. That's what we call inheritance. Now, we have these 2 terms. We have genes and we have alleles, by which genes is defined as a portion of the DNA that determine a certain trait. So, genes ang magsasabi kung anong trait ba ito, para saan ba itong gene na ito. Is it for the hair color? Is it for the skin tone? Is it for the type of eyes, nose, lips, or whatsoever? While alleles are different forms of same gene, which is responsible for variations of a given trait to be expressed. So, in simple terms, alleles varies the genes. Or, for us to better understand this one, let's have this differentiation. We have genes versus alleles, by which, let's say for example, the gene is for the hair color. Now, let's say for an instance, the hair color could be black or blonde. Being black or blonde is the responsibility of an allele. Therefore, si allele is pinag-iiba-iba niya depende sa sequences ng bases na nandoon sa gene ang magiging trait or yung mai-express na characteristic sa isang offspring or sa isang organism. So that's the difference between genes and alleles. Now, these other terms are also very important in our discussion of the law of dominance. And so let's start with the first two. We have the dominant traits and the recessive traits. It is said here that the dominant traits are the traits that are being expressed, while recessive traits are the traits that are being covered up. And so for us to better understand that one, let's go back to the diagram we had a while ago. Let's say for instance, having a black hair is the dominant trait, while having a blonde hair is the recessive trait. Now, in our cells, alleles always come in pair. Therefore, let's say for example, your father have inherited a dominant allele in you of having a black hair, and your mother have inherited to you an allele of having a blonde hair, which is recessive. If they join together, since an allele, or rather alleles in our cell always come in pair, we will be having one capital and one small letter B as we label it. By this cause, the characteristic that shall be expressed in you is having a black hair, because that's the dominant trait. It will be expressed, it will cover the recessive trait. But not necessarily speaking that the recessive trait, which is having a blonde hair, will be disregarded already. You will be carrying it in you. And there will be a possibility that if you had an offspring, if you will have an offspring, you'll be passing that recessive trait also to your offspring. And if you had a partner who is also recessive or dominant for having a blonde hair, then therefore, you might have an offspring of having a blonde hair. So that's the difference between between the dominant traits and the recessive traits. Now, let's go to the genotype and the phenotype. Ano pinagkaiba nila? Genotype is a pair of allele in the cells of an organism, which is ito nga yun. Yung capital B, small letter B dito sa ating diagram. Or pwede namang parehong capital B, parehong small letter B. Basta it is a pair of allele, magkasamang allele. While phenotype is the trait that's actually expressed in an organism, the appearance. By this cause, yun yung color ng hair dito sa ating diagram. So, if the genotype is written in letter, the phenotype are the characteristics that are being expressed in an organism. Yun naman yung pinagkaiba ni genotype at saka ni phenotype. Now, homozygous and heterozygous. These two are actually very different from one another, and it's easy to classify them. Whenever we say homozygous, these are two alleles that are the same. From the word itself, homo, therefore there's only one type of an allele. So it could only be two capital letter B, or two dominant alleles, or two recessive alleles, or two small letter B's. While the heterozygous type of an allele are two different alleles for a trait. So therefore, it could be one capital and one small letter in our diagram. So, yung pinagkaiba lang nila, pag sinabi natin yung homozygous, going back to it, parehas dapat yung type ng alleles na meron sa isang pair ng alleles. So, it's either parehong capital or parehong small. Parehong dominant or parehong recessive. While for heterozygous, it's a combination of one dominant and one recessive. That's why it was said to be hetero. It is composed of more than one, by which there's only two in a pair. So, these are the terms that we have to remember in our discussion of the law of dominance. Now, let's already discuss the law of dominance. And do not forget that our goal for today is for you to become capable of predicting phenotypic expressions of traits. Or in other words, kailangan malaman natin using problems kung ano ba yung magiging traits or ano ba yung characteristics na lalabas sa mga offspring ng parents na nandoon sa problem natin. So we will be predicting here using a Punnett square. Later on, we will be discussing what a Punnett square is. Now, as said by the law of dominance, one factor in a pair of alleles may prevent the other factor in the pair from being expressed. Or in other words, dominant allele will prevent the recessive allele from being expressed. The keyword here is prevent. According to the law of dominance, there will be one allele to dominate. If that allele is a dominant allele, or if that allele, or rather if that trait is a dominant trait, it will dominate. It will be the one to be expressed. It will cover the recessive trait or the recessive allele. But not necessarily speaking again that the recessive allele or the recessive trait will not be important anymore. Because always remember, alleles always come in pair in our cells. Hindi po pwede na dahil dominant yung isang allele at siya ang nagdo-dominate ay mawawala na yung recessive allele. It will always be there. But the matter here, or the thing here being talked about by the law of dominance, is that because one of these alleles is dominant, it will dominate. So therefore, it will just hide the other trait to express. For us to better understand the concept behind the law of dominance, let's have these problems. Now, number one problem here says that inside the laboratory, a cross between a pea plant that is a homozygous recessive short and the pea plant that is homozygous dominant tall was performed. So, what we have to take note of this problem are the two terms, homozygous recessive short and homozygous dominant tall. Because with these two, we will be able to get the genotypes that we will be crossing together. So, it was said here that homozygous dominant tall. So therefore, being tall is the dominant trait. So we will be or rather, we will be labeling it as a 2 capital letter B kasi homozygous siya. Therefore, may iisa lang type ng allele sa kanya, which is dominant tall. So capital letter T. Yung isa naman ay homozygous recessive short. So small letter T, hindi letter S, because we have to use the same letter that is the dominant trait. I mean, we'll be following the first letter of the dominant trait. Therefore, it will be small letter T. So, it will look like this one. Let 2 small letter T's times 2 capital letter T's. And using a Punnett square, we'll be crossing this 2. Ano po ba yung Punnett square? Well, Punnett square is a diagram being used to identify the possible phenotype of the offspring of these parents, for example, that we have in our problem. So let's say for an instance, we have 2 capital letter T's. We'll be placing it above the square. And we have 2 capital letter T's. We'll be multiplying it. We'll just be crossing it. So if we'll be multiplying 1 capital letter T to the other small letter T, which is this 2, we will have 1 capital and 1 small. If we will be multiplying this one, we will be having the same answer. We multiply another one, We'll have the same one. And last one, we'll have again one capital T and small letter t. Therefore, if we'll be getting the genotype, there's only one type here. There's only one genotype here. And that is one capital letter T and one small letter t. Kasi wala namang ibang lumabas. Wala namang dalawang small letter t. Walang dalawang capital letter t. So, yung ilalagay lang natin sa genotype is kung ano yung lumabas doon sa ating Punnett square. By which, if we'll be getting the phenotype, sabi natin, genotypes are the alleles, phenotypes are the traits. Therefore, what are the traits here? The traits that shall be expressed according to the law of dominance shall be the dominant allele. Therefore, what's the trait for the dominant allele? That's having a tall height. So our phenotype is tall. If we get the genotypic ratio, of course, we'll be having 4:0:0. Kasi wala naman tayong homozygous dominant na lumabas sa ating Punnett square at wala din namang homozygous recessive na lumabas sa ating Punnett square. So, iisang type lang by which they are 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, 4:0. Now, while for the phenotypic ratio, the same. We have 4 tall:0 short. Kasi dalawa lang naman yung characteristics is either tall or short. If you are dominant, homozygous dominant, you'll get tall. If you are heterozygous, you'll get tall. You will only be getting the characteristics of being short if both of the alleles are recessive. Therefore, yung parent na homozygous recessive, kaya siya short. Kasi yung alleles na meron siya ay dalawang recessive alleles. Doon lang lalabas ang recessive trait according to the law of dominance. Lalabas lang si recessive trait pag wala siyang kasamang dominant allele. Because again, the dominant allele will cover up the recessive allele. Now, another problem. What will be the traits that will result from a cross between a homozygous dominant pink flower? Remember that one. And the heterozygous pink flower. So dito, may heterozygous na tayo. Kanina sa first problem, we have 2 homozygous parents. Now, we have a dominant pink flower. Therefore, the dominant trait here is having a pink flower. And it's also mentioned here pala that the recessive trait is being white. Therefore, we have, for the first parent, 2 capital letter P kasi siya ay dominant for pink, homozygous dominant rather for pink flower. So, iisa lang ang type ng allele niya, which is dominant pink flower. Kaya letter P ang gagamitin natin. Kasi again, the dominant trait or the dominant allele, the first letter of the trait shall be followed. While the other one is heterozygous. So, yung isa sa kanya ay dominant, yung isa sa kanya ay recessive. Because again, whenever we say heterozygous, these are composed of 2 different alleles. By which, ito yung ating parents. We'll be crossing 2 capital letter P's against 1 capital P with small letter p. Going back, using a Punnett square, we have 2 capital letter P's above and 1 capital letter P, small letter p at the side of our square. Again, we'll just be multiplying it. We multiply this one, we'll be getting 2 capital letter P's. We multiply this one, we will also be getting 2 capital letter P's. We multiply this, and we get 1 capital letter P and small letter p. So, heterozygous. So, if you'll be observing, hindi na parehas lahat ng lumabas. Unlike doon sa ating first problem. Then, if we multiply the last one, we will be getting also a heterozygous one. And if we get the genotype, of course, we have 1 homozygous dominant, which is 2 capital letter P's, and 1 heterozygous, which is 1 capital letter P, and 1 small letter p. For the phenotype, we have, of course, two genotypes here. But the thing here is that, will there be two characteristics to be expressed? Of course not. Because again, according to the law of dominance, the recessive allele or the recessive trait will be covered up if there is one dominant allele or dominant trait combined to it. Therefore, ang ating phenotype ay pink lang. Kasi yung dalawang capital letter P na homozygous dominant, ang characteristic niya, pink. Yung heterozygous, may isa siyang dominant allele, therefore, mako-cover up niya yung recessive allele, kaya pink pa rin siya. So, our phenotype is having a pink flower. For our genotypic ratio, of course, we have 2:2:0. Kasi meron tayong dalawang homozygous dominant, dalawang heterozygous, wala naman tayong homozygous recessive. So, 2:2:0. While for our phenotypic ratio, it will still be the same. 4:0. Why? Kasi nga, yung ating mga genotypes ay parehong maglalabas ng dominant trait. Because again, according to the law of dominance, if there is one dominant allele mixed with one recessive allele, it will cover up the recessive trait to express. Okay, now I think we had already 3 problems, and I think that's enough already, and I think you already know how does the law of dominance happens, or the concept behind the law of dominance, and I think you can already perform this one by yourself. Now, I would like you by yourself to answer the next problem, or the 4th problem. And for you to answer the 4th problem, after I read the question, I would like you to pause this video again. Then after answering, you play it again, then the answers will be revealed. Again, for the 4th question, a heterozygous curly hair of a mother will be crossed to a homozygous recessive trait of a father. Now, what will be the characteristics to manifest with their offspring? Pause this video now and answer this problem. Okay, to answer this problem, of course, it was said here that we have a heterozygous curly hair and a homozygous recessive trait. Therefore, the dominant trait here is having a curly hair kasi yung isa heterozygous. Therefore, yung isa sa kanyang allele is dominant, yung isa sa kanyang allele is recessive. Ang lumabas na characteristic sa kanya ay curly hair. Ibig sabihin nun, yung dominant trait ay having a curly hair. So therefore, we'll be using letter C as our label for this problem. So we have a heterozygous, one capital and one small letter C, multiplied to a homozygous recessive straight hair, which is 2 small letter C's. If we perform upon its square, we multiply this one capital times 1 small, will be yielding to 1 capital and 1 small. We multiply 2 small letter C's, we'll be having 2 small letter C's, of course. We have, again, 1 capital and 1 small, we'll have a heterozygous, and again, another small C's to be multiplied will yield 2 small C's. So for our genotype, we have 2 genotypes here. We have 1 heterozygous, which is 1 capital and 1 small, and 1 homozygous recessive, which is 2 small letter C's. And for our phenotype, we will be having a curly hair and a straight hair. Kasi, bakit may straight hair? Kasi yung isa nating genotype na lumabas is 2 small letter C's. Wala siyang kasamang dominant trait, therefore, the characteristics that will manifest will already be the recessive trait or the recessive allele. Again, according to the law of dominance, magkakaroon lang ng dominant trait to be expressed if in the pair of alleles, there's one dominant allele that will cover the recessive allele. Now, for our genotypic ratio, we have 2:2:0. And for our phenotypic ratio, we have 2 curly is to 2 straight. And that's the law of dominance. And again, do not forget that according to the law of dominance, if there's one dominant allele, it will always be manifesting, whether it's heterozygous or homozygous dominant. Now, the recessive allele will only be manifesting if there's no dominant allele paired to it. If there's a dominant one, it will cover up the recessive allele. And also, I hope that you have learned many things about this lesson, and I also do hope that we have obtained the competency that you were already able to predict phenotypic expressions or the possible traits to express in the offspring of parents given a specific allele. Thank you very much for watching this video. See you again. Bye.